Good morning, everyone. It is November 27th, and what you're looking at is footage from a huge storm that hit the Black Sea and wrecked Russian defenses in Crimea, devastated Sochi, which is an important port city on Russia's western coast, as well as devastated some of the trenches, coastal barriers, and fighting positions that were built along the beaches in Crimea. They were all largely washed away. Local reports said that winds gusted to 90 miles per hour with waves of up to 30 feet. The winds were sustained at 65 miles per hour. As of right now, half the population of Crimea, or about 500,000 people in Crimea, are without power. Now, there are questions as to whether Russia's air defenses are still up. But as you can see, much of this storm is quite devastating along the coastline, which is where many of Russia's air defenses were positioned. And can Ukraine take advantage of a lull or a degradation of Russian defenses to conduct any kind of offensive operation with aerial or seaborne drones? An additional concern is the state of Russia's rotary wing aircraft. The image you're seeing here is in the United States. This took place in 1989. It was a microburst at Fort Hood, Texas during a storm. And as you can see, wreaked havoc on Apache rotors along their flight line. Now, because Russia has built most of their hardened shelters on the other side of Ukraine because they were more afraid of NATO than they are of the weather, and rightly so, this is kind of a freak event. They likely have sustained damage to their helicopters in a similar manner. Now, the winds that caused the damage in 1989 at Fort Hood were, it was a singular event where 95 mile per hour winds hit the helicopters. This, in Crimea, we're seeing sustained 65 mile per hour winds with 90 mile per hour gusts taking place. So we can expect some damage to helicopters. Now, some of you may be asking, why are helicopter rotors so weak? Well, they're designed to take the rotational forces of the helicopter in such a way that they're strong for what they do. But when wind comes from an opposite direction or alternate directions, acting as an airfoil, it can torque, bend, and break these rotors, which will cause them to have to be repaired, replaced, which will they will need to lean on their logistics capability heavily. Speaking on logistics capability, the winds are still quite high in the region, and all of us who lived in the Midwest, the Great Plains, Canada, and the United States, or any high wind area know that winds can play havoc on semi-trucks, as we see here. This means that it is most likely that we will see the Russian logistics slow or at least come to a halt as the storms, as the weather, as the roads are cleared, and trying to avoid having their trucks get tipped over by the wind en route to their destination. And this also includes going from Crimea to places like Kherson, where daily logistics movements are critical to resupply Russian front lines. And if they have to stop for a day or two to clear roads and deal with the wind, that interruption can be exploited by Ukraine as well. And as such, you start seeing these huge backups of trucks take place where miles long convoys of trucks are stopped because they just can't get where they need to go due to the winds or damage. Now here's a close-up look of the trenching system they built along the Black Sea. And in a similar location, you can kind of see what that's going to look like when they return. You can see the extent of these trenching systems along the coastline. They are multiple kilometers long, all of which are likely highly damaged, if not completely washed out and destroyed at this point. In addition, Russia has installed protective barriers to the south side of the Kerch Bridge, but we are not sure if those are still intact or what level of damage they can sustain when it comes to storm surge from the high winds and high waves surrounding Crimea. Now, it's worth noting the extent of the damage to the Russian military infrastructure and assets in Crimea and the region, Sochi, etc., is unknown. We have seen damage take place, but we don't know the total damage to radar systems, aircraft, trenching, etc. That's going to come forward in the next few days. However, Russia won't officially make any claims of the damage because that serves them no good purpose. But we probably will see some of the damage on social media. Nonetheless, this can create an opportunity for Ukraine to conduct both air and sea strikes on various targets, including the Russian port systems, their ships, bridges, etc. And this possibly could include the Crimean Bridge if the defenses are down or if there's a gap in coverage of those systems because of this storm. But again, we're not entirely sure what that looks like, and we won't probably be sure for a few days. Nonetheless, it's worth noting that as the damage is cleaned up, we may hear an old Russian trope come forward, and that is the conspiracy that the U.S. uses climate weapons against Russia. They made this claim 2 years ago, back in 2021, and it's not the first time they made it, when Russian lawmakers claimed in various interviews that the U.S. had been using climate weapons to cause weather anomalies in Moscow and other parts of Russia back in 2021. Now, Russia claimed that the U.S. was trying to melt Russia's permafrost using extremely advanced weaponry. They also claimed that the U.S. was keeping the winter artificially warm in order to limit water assets, and that, again, the U.S. was keeping the summers artificially cool to shorten the growing season and cause a famine. These are all things that Russian media have claimed, so it might come out yet again in this new level of weather taking place, these storms taking place in Crimea, if Russian assets were damaged or caused major issues for the Russian air defenses or defenses of the Crimean Bridge, this could be once again something that the Russian media brings forward to discuss that the U.S. is apparently using climate weapons against Russia. We'll see, and we'll see what Ukraine can do to take advantage of this situation if they can at all, and possibly gain some quick victories in the wake of this major storm that took place off the Black Sea.